The unity of the Godhead can be seen not just in the common building blocks of life, but I believe it can also be seen in the similarities that are found among organisms. God has placed similar structures in different organisms. These are the similarities between organisms that I want to refer to. For example, in all organisms, whether you're talking about bacteria all the way up to humans, we have some things that are found in every single organism on the planet. We have ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that is found in the cells of every organism on the planet, and ATP carries energy from one place to another in the cell. It's found in everything. There are ribosomes. There are these things called ribosomes that build protein molecules. They're found in every single cell of every single organism on the planet. We have DNA inside organisms, inside the cells of organisms. It's found in all organisms. There are certain things that are found everywhere across the planet that I believe are evidences of the fact that all these things are created by the same God. And then when we look at smaller and smaller groups of this whole larger group, we find there's further similarities you find in successively smaller groups. For example, in all eukaryotes, that would be everything but the bacteria. And we're going to talk about what a eukaryote is in a future chapter, but for now all you need to know is it's everything except bacteria. They have all those other things, the ATP and the ribosomes and the DNA, but in addition they have linear chromosomes, they have nuclei, they have phospholipid membranes. You don't have to know necessarily what those things are, just that there are certain similarities that all of those things have. And then a subgroup of that would be the animals. Another one would be the plants. And then the animals have all of those characteristics that all organisms had, plus all eukaryotes have, and they have a stage in development known as the blastula stage. Then among the animals, a smaller group are the chordates. They have all those things we just mentioned, plus the existence of a notochord at some point in development. Smaller group are the vertebrates. They have all of those things, plus they develop vertebrae in their backbone. And then a smaller group from that, we have the mammals. They have all those things, plus hair, milk, and 3 inner ear bones. Smaller group, primates, they have all those similarities, plus 3-dimensional vision. Then in what we call the hominoids, a subgroup of the primates, we have all those things, plus 5 bumps on their molar teeth. And then a smaller group are the humans. They have all of those things, plus extremely large brains compared to the size of their bodies. So what we have here is a spectrum of perfection of unity, a spectrum of perfection of similarities. From some organisms have very few similarities, they have similarities but very few, all the way down to organisms that have a large number, a long list of similarities. That's a spectrum of perfection of similarity that suggests, as we extrapolate that out, that there's something that is perfectly unified, something that is perfectly one, and that would be the one God who created all these things. In addition to the similarities among organisms that I believe suggest that there is a single creator and that creator is one God, we also have the phenomenon called a biological system in biology. What is a biological system? Well, I'm going to use an analogy to help us understand what a system is in general and then how it applies to biology. The Bible, in fact, uses this analogy, so I'm going to use that. The church that we're familiar with is made of multiple members. A church is not made up of one person. A church is made up of multiple people. And secondly, each of these individuals that make up the church is, according to Scripture, given a very different set of spiritual gifts, unique. Now, any one person in a church does not have all of the gifts. They only have one or a few of the gifts. They don't have a perfect measure or a complete measure of all the gifts, or even, in most cases, the one gift. And this means that they each have to work together with other members of the church. They have different gifts Together, they collectively have all the gifts that are necessary for a church. But it's only when they work together. So each individual member of a church has a separate gift. Those gifts are to be used together with the gifts of others. No one person then should be considered any greater or lesser than any other person in the church, because they're all necessary in the structure of the church. In the normal behavior or activity of the church, there's nobody that is greater than another. And according to Scripture, when one person hurts in the church, it should be that all the people hurt in the church. Or one person is blessed in the church, all the people in the church are in fact blessed. So that each member impacts or causes changes in the other members of the church. The more a church is unified, the better the church pictures God Himself. The more they're unified, the more true these claims are. The more unique each person is in the church, and the more each person in the church works together with other people, and the more they're impacted by other people in the church. The church, with its multiple members, is an example of a system. And in fact, the Bible turns to another system, which is the human body, to teach us how the church is supposed to be. The human body is made up of multiple members, multiple parts. Each of the parts of the body have a different function. In reality, you shouldn't consider any one part of the body greater or lesser than any other part of the body. The parts must work together for the body to function, and each part of the body impacts the whole body. And every member of the body is impacted by every other. And that's the nature of a biological system. It's a set of entities that have multiple parts. Each of those parts have what we call imperfect properties. They have abilities that they can't do everything. They only can do certain things, and they have to work with other parts of the system to accomplish the full function of the system. And each part impacts other parts. A biological system has what we call emergent properties. The biological system can actually do things as a system when it's all together that the individual parts can't do. In fact, even if you considered all the individual parts separately but add them up, you would still not be able to do what all the parts can do when they come together and work together. Those emergent properties are properties that arise when all the pieces are together and working together, but don't arise under any other circumstance. And again, the more unified a biological system is, the better that system is a picture of the one God who created it. So let's look at examples of biological systems. We've already mentioned the body. The human body the Bible uses it as an example for the church. It is also a biological system. Our body, the human body, has a number of parts, organs, systems that interact with each other to allow for the functioning of the entire body. And the result is a body that can do some amazing things, emergent properties like development to grow up into an adult, or reproduction to actually produce a new copy of itself. This can't be done. These kinds of things can't be done by the individual parts. Even if you had all the individual parts side by side, they only are possible when all the parts are working together, functioning together. But you can look more closely at the body, to those organ systems that in fact make up the body, and you'll find, let's say you take the circulatory system. The circulatory system has a heart and veins and arteries and that sort of thing. The organ system has a bunch of organs that work together and function towards the function of the larger organ system. So the circulatory system creates the effect of circulating blood that really can't be done by the individual components of the circulatory system, but only when the organs are functioning together. And notice it's called a system. It's an organ system because it's made of multiple components. Those components work together, effecting a result that can't be done by the individual components. But the organ system is made of organs. The organs themselves are systems. The organs are actually made of things we call tissues. For example, the heart, which is an organ in the circulatory system, is made of a number of different kinds of tissues. There is fat tissue. Fat tissue is protecting the heart from getting bumped or bruised. We have the tissue that is tough and fibrous that makes up the valves of the heart. We have another tissue that is making up the bulk of the heart, which is a very special kind of muscle tissue that can expand and contract, but also allow electrical impulses to run through. Cardiac muscle tissue is a very special tissue for the heart. A number of different kinds of tissue like that combine together to make a heart. So the heart is made of a number of different members called tissues. The tissues, each tissue has its own job. They work together to do something at the level of the heart, pumping blood, that the individual tissues cannot do. Then if we look more closely at the tissues, so let's say we take the cardiac tissue, the cardiac muscle tissue, they involve a set of members of smaller entities called cells. The cells work together to, in cardiac muscle tissue, for example, the cells are stuck together, they're connected together. The cells can expand and contract, and they can also convey electrical impulses. They're special cells and a variety of different kinds of cells that interact in just the right way to produce the tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, that can expand and contract and can respond to electrical impulses from the brain to do it at the right time. If you look more closely at the cells that make up the tissues, you find that the cell is a system. It's made of interacting molecules, or in our body's cases, interacting organelles that work together to do the function of the cell itself. Then if we look at the components of the cell, the little organelles that are found therein, things like mitochondria, we'll look at these in a future chapter. Each organelle is made up of, is a system itself, made up of molecules that are interacting with one another to do the functions of the organelle. If we back up to the larger scale, we've got the body again. Looking at the body is found with other organisms in a community. We have a community of organisms that interact with each other. So we have the community is itself a system. Different species are different parts of that community. They work together to do things in the community that the individual species cannot. There's even instances in some cases, like the hive of bees, where the individuals in a group, in a population, actually work together and do things that, again, the individual bees cannot do. Biological systems are amazing. At multiple levels of organizations, biology is full of systems. Where does all of this come from? Where did this biological unity come from? The similarity that we find among organisms can certainly be explained by a God, a common God who created all of these things. But it turns out that naturalism has another explanation that could explain the same data in a very different way. According to evolution, all the organisms that currently exist are descendant from a common ancestor. And the reason that they're similar is because they've inherited common traits from their ancestor. So, in a general sense, the similarities that are found among organisms could be explained in either way. either as God having a common creator having created the same thing in multiple organisms, or in those multiple organisms having inherited those characteristics from a common ancestor. However, when we turn to biological systems, naturalism doesn't have quite so easy a time explaining what we observe. Biological systems are extremely complex. They're made of many parts that work together in very intricate ways. The complexity is just, it's much more complex than anything we've seen arise by nature. In other words, without help, without a designer, we've just never seen anything come to be in the natural world all by itself without help that is as complex as biological systems are complex. In particular, biological systems have emergent properties, properties that only are seen when all the pieces are not just together, but are working together in producing properties that, again, the individual pieces can't do. In the natural world, some emergent properties can be generated naturally. For example, when we put subatomic particles together to create atoms, atoms have emergent properties that aren't seen in the subatomic particles. We can put atoms together into molecules, and emergent properties can occur in the molecules that aren't seen in the atoms. But in the case of those situations, we have very few parts that are put together, and we have very few and very simple emergent properties. When we get to biology, we often have many, many, many parts, hundreds, scores to hundreds of parts, many more parts than are seen in the natural world that naturally come together. And the emergent properties are extremely complex many times. For example, the ability of the human body to reproduce. That's an awesome complexity. That sort of complexity does not occur in the natural world. And in fact, the biological systems often have so many parts, and they're so complex that they're even more complex than the systems that humans create. A manufacturing plant would be an example of a system that humans design. Many parts, the parts work together to effect the end, which is production of whatever it is the plant is supposed to be producing. But you look at some of the most complex in manufacturing plants, and they often have many fewer components than the number of components you find in biological systems. They are not producing as complex an emergent property as we see in the human design systems, aren't producing emergent properties as complex as those in biological systems. So it seems as if biological systems have been put together by something even more wise, even smarter, even cleverer than human beings. Not only is the complexity suggesting that it's been designed, but that the design is something that is more complex than human design. Something greater than humans have generated biological complexity. Also, there's another characteristic of biological systems that's intriguing, that suggests that they are designed. Biological systems are what we call irreducibly complex. What this means is, if you take a system that already exists and begin taking away parts and components of that system that maybe you think are not necessary, you do this very carefully and reduce it down to what is the simplest. Can we keep doing that to where we only have one part? And can the system keep working as long as you keep reducing the parts? Let's say you're starting with 100 parts. Take one away, you got 99, the system can still work. You take another away, 98, the system can still work. Can you keep doing that all the way down to one piece? The answer is, in biological systems, no. You might be able to reduce it somewhat by taking pieces out, but there's going to be a point at which there are no more pieces that aren't necessary for the system to work. If you take out any additional piece at that point, the system fails to work. It doesn't work at all. I mean, not just that it doesn't work very well, it just doesn't work at all. It's at that point that you've reached what we call the minimum complexity of the system. That is as simple as a system can be. And it's irreducibly simple at that point. You can't reduce it any further or it doesn't function. The problem with biological systems, as far as naturalism is concerned, is that point of irreducible complexity is still a bunch of components, a bunch of pieces. There's still at least 16 pieces, 20 pieces, 30 pieces, even if it's in its absolute simplest form. Now, the problem that poses for naturalism is that naturalism explains the origin of biological complexity of organisms by the process of evolution. Evolution works by just adding one piece to an organism at a time, one part at a time. It doesn't have the ability to take 5 parts and put them together. It can only basically add complexity one small piece at a time, one step at a time. Problem is, if you have 10 pieces that must be all together for a system to work, and if you only have 9, it won't work, then natural selection can't build, or evolution can't build the system from 1 component to 2 to 3 to 4. It just simply won't work anywhere in here until you get to 10. But evolution has no mechanism to pull 10 things together to make something work. That system is what we call irreducibly complex. It's just too complex to be reduced to anything simpler, so evolution cannot produce it by the stepwise process that evolution produces things. What this results in is the observation that the similarity among organisms, the incredible complexity of biological systems, cannot be explained by naturalism. It is best and perhaps only explained by a God of complexity who created organisms with systems, with interacting parts, that is a picture of the one God who created all things.